full and the need for more capacity is urgent. Full steam ahead for the high-speed rail project linking London to the north of England, despite a setback in the courts over compensation. Why soldiers returning from duty are more likely to commit violent crime than the rest of the population. It's 75 years since the launch of HMS Belfast, once the largest and most powerful cruiser in the Royal Navy. And it's Red Nose Day. It's the 25th year of comic relief. All the biggest names in comedy and entertainment will be fundraising tonight.
On Look North in half an hour, more legal challenges ahead, this time from Yorkshire groups opposed to high-speed rail. And 20 years after he disappeared, the family of Sean Thompson ask for new information.
Hello, welcome to the BBC News at 1. Parents have long raised concerns about having sufficient school places for their children. Well, now a report by the National Audit Office has confirmed some fears are well-founded. 250,000 extra school spaces will be needed in England by autumn next year. The report found 1 in 5 primary schools is already full or near capacity, and it questions whether the government's £5 billion investment on extra places is being used effectively. Our education correspondent Luke Walton has more.
Over the past decade, England has had a baby boom, and as those children have reached school age, the pressure on places has intensified. At this London primary, they're dressed up for Red Nose Day, but the squeeze on space here is no laughing matter.
We've taken 2 extra classes into the school because the demand is so high. That's obviously caused us issues around timetabling spaces in the school, making sure we have the right number of classrooms for all the children, and also making sure that their curriculum is the same and equal for all the children. So there are a number of issues it's caused.
The National Audit Office predicts the problem will get worse, with an extra 250,000 places required by the autumn of next year. It says ministers need more information on whether spending to increase school capacity is proving effective. Local councils share the concern.
The challenge is to make sure that there's enough money in the system, which at the moment we know there isn't, and that we don't see delays that are caused by some of the bureaucracy that exists around opening new schools, getting in the way of providing those high-quality school places.
Labour accuse the government of failing the next generation of pupils, but ministers say there's been a rapid increase in spending on new school places and insist help is now more focused on areas of greatest need. One positive point from today's report is that the school system is still managing, for the time at least, to find places for pupils who want them. But as the baby boomers fill our playgrounds in ever greater numbers, that pressure will grow with them. Luke Walton, BBC News.
Well, let's hear from our correspondent Duncan Kennedy, who's at a primary school in Reading, and as you can see, they're obviously gearing up, entering into the spirit of Red Nose Day. Duncan.
Okay, this school is typical of the problem we're facing here today. Massively oversubscribed, extremely popular. In the past couple of years alone, they've had to find 60 extra places to meet that demand. So what have they done here? Created this, a temporary couple of classrooms in the playground, prefabricated, not a brilliant solution. Kevin McDaniel is the head of education in Reading. Kevin, why are we getting this massive extra demand?
Reading has been a very popular location for people to come and find work in the southeast. We're seeing now those people taking work and starting families in houses where we weren't expecting to see families because of the economic conditions there now in that area.
Shouldn't we have seen this coming, this extra demand?
In Reading, we saw an increase coming, and we've spent £25 million since 2009 providing 1,300 school places. But the rate of growth, as the Office of National Statistics has told us, is larger than we've seen forever. We're still £2,500 places short.
But temporary accommodation like this prefabricated classroom is not the answer, it's not the long-term answer.
It's not the long-term answer. The use of the temporary space enables us to ensure that every child goes to school, and that's what we're committed to doing. But we're able to use the funding that government's announced to be able to deliver permanent places for our residents.
Right, Mr McDaniel, thank you very much indeed. And Kevin actually tells me they might have the funding for the extra places at this particular school. He also tells me it's not just a question of numbers. Ofsted rates this school as outstanding. Kate?
Duncan, thank you. The government has partially fought off a series of objections to High Speed 2 in the courts, but in a victory to residents affected by the project, the compensation scheme has been deemed unlawful. The first phase of HS2 would run from London to Birmingham, a second phase extending the line to Leeds and Manchester. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
High speed and highly controversial. The plan to build a super-fast railway through the middle of England is still on track after the government wins the latest court battle.
It is a convincing decision by the judge justifying the government's policy on high-speed rail. It means that we now have from the judge a green light to move forward with the project, subject to the parliamentary approvals.
It is a significant victory for the government. This court case really had the potential to cause them problems. It could have cost them more money. It could even have delayed the whole project for a couple of years. Well, that is not now going to happen, but their opponents haven't given up yet.
We're almost certainly going to appeal, particularly the issue that the government hasn't made a decision, which I think everybody recognises they clearly have. That's a totally bizarre judgment in our view, and clearly needs to be appealed. And I think we'll look very closely at whether we should be appealing the issue of the timing of the challenge.
The judge did find fault with one important part of the government's scheme, saying a consultation on compensation wasn't fair to those whose houses will be blighted by the line. Ministers say they'll put that right. So for now, high-speed rail still has a green light. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
A man has been charged with the murder of Christina Atkins, who was killed on her way to school in Birmingham. Christina, who was 16, died after she was stabbed on the top deck of a bus last week. Philip Simlin, who's 22 and from Walsall, was remanded in custody and will appear at Birmingham Crown Court in May. 3 British men have pleaded guilty to engaging in the preparation of acts of terrorism by travelling to Pakistan for training. They entered pleas via video link at the Old Bailey. Their trial had been due to start next month. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Matt Prodger is at the Old Bailey. What had the men done?
Well, the 3 men admitted to preparing for acts of terrorism by travelling to Pakistan for terror training and also to providing information and advice to other people wishing to do the same. Imran Mahmood, one of them, had spent a year in Pakistan where he's thought to have received terror training and also possibly fought in Afghanistan. But the other 2 are more unlikely would-be terrorists. Jahangir Alam, also known as Abu Khaled, is a former police community support officer who worked in London. He had dreams of becoming a chief inspector of police. He later made a video renouncing his police career. Now, he was arrested at his home close to the Olympic Stadium just weeks before the Olympic Games last year. And the third defendant, Richard Dart, is a white Muslim convert from Weymouth in Dorset. He was the subject of a BBC 3 documentary broadcast in 2011, which charted his path towards extremism. Now, at an earlier court hearing, there was evidence heard that police had recovered fragments of text messages in which the men talked about targeting Wootton Bassett, the place that has become a symbol of respect for those wishing to respect the soldiers returning from abroad. But that played no part in these hearings, and we're unlikely to hear the full details of what these men were planning to do until a sentencing hearing in April.
Matt, thank you. Men are more likely to commit violent crimes if they've served in the armed forces. Researchers compared more than 13,000 serving and former military personnel with police records. Servicemen who've been exposed to fighting were more than 50% more likely to commit a violent offence than those in non-combat roles. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale has more.
The cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have already been measured in blood and treasure. But until recently, little's been known about the psychological effects on those who serve in uniform. The symptoms often associated with post-traumatic stress. Lewis Mackay fought in both conflicts. He and his wife Emma noticed a dramatic change in his behaviour when he returned from Helmand after seeing a comrade lose his legs in a roadside bomb. He's since left the army and has successfully sought medical help.
All of a sudden, the urge would come over me is, you're going to hit her. And at first I'm thinking, well, you know, that's not right. But then after, you know, a few times it got to a stage where I was physically having to stop myself doing that. I was either sitting on my hands or I would bite my hand, you know, to stop me lashing out, or I'd have to walk out the room.
Now, new research has found that overall violent offending among military personnel was 2% higher than the general population, 11% compared with 8.7%. But the rates of violent offending for those under 30 was 3 times greater, 20% in the military compared with just under 7% for civilians. And those who'd experienced direct combat were 53% more likely to violently offend than those servicemen not in combat.
Background risk factors play a big part. So the socio-demographics of those in the military, and also those who had a previous history of violence prior to joining the military, were more likely to violently offend. But we also looked at the risk factors associated with combat roles and experiences on deployment, and they also increased the risk of violent offending.
The Ministry of Defence points out that the vast majority of those in the military do not offend. It also says there is help for those who need it. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Details of Labour and Liberal Democrat proposals for a new system of press regulation will be published this afternoon. It's their response to David Cameron's decision to walk away from cross-party talks on the issue. The Prime Minister doesn't want a new system of regulation to be backed by a new law, preferring one supported by a royal charter instead, as Ross Hawkins reports.
They're getting ready to decide the future of the press here in a row that will set Tories and Lib Dems against each other. This is part of the Prime Minister's official plan, published in Parliament today. Conservatives making their case on their own.
We are bringing this issue to a conclusion. What I think we can't go on with is a situation where the victims and the public don't know what sort of press regulation we're going to have. That needs to change.
But the Deputy Prime Minister will say he disagrees with David Cameron.
What we are actually working towards is building on what the Prime Minister has already advocated, strengthening it in a few simple places, and hopefully that will enjoy the cross-party consensus that I think is still necessary in order to make progress.
Some press standards campaigners have been lobbying MPs pretty hard here at Westminster. The question is, will they be any happier with the plans from Labour or the Liberal Democrats, about which we should hear more this afternoon? All those private negotiations have made newsrooms nervous.
To be honest, I think the whole thing's been pretty unsatisfactory from the beginning. We're talking about a major change.
But with those talks over, the final lines in the Leveson story are about to be written. Ross Hawkins, BBC News at Westminster.
The independent MP for Falkirk, Eric Joyce, has been arrested following reports of a disturbance in a House of Commons bar last night. Mr Joyce, who resigned from the Labour Party last year after being convicted of assault at another parliamentary bar, is now in police custody. Britain and France are stepping up their pressure for the European Union to lift its ban on supplying weapons to rebel forces in Syria. David Cameron and François Hollande have told the second day of an EU summit in Brussels they want an end to the embargo. Well, let's get more from our Europe correspondent Chris Morris. What's the justification and how has their call been received then?
Yeah, hi Kate. Well, David Cameron's basic point is that after 2 years, and it is 2 years today, of what he called a dreadful conflict in Syria, it is time for a change in policy on the arms embargo. He emphasised, as everyone has done, that there needs to be a political solution, but he argued that that would be more likely if the Syrian opposition was made a stronger and more credible force. Now, one thing he said which was interesting was that lifting the arms embargo would not necessarily mean the UK giving arms to rebel groups, but he does want to make them stronger. I think the French, if anything, have been more forceful. François Hollande said that if agreement can't be reached on lifting the arms embargo at an EU level, then France would, quote, shoulder its responsibilities. And French officials have been quoted talking about the possible supply, for example, of anti-aircraft missiles to the rebels to enable them to negate the absolute superiority that President Assad's forces have in the air. Other countries are much, much more reluctant. Chancellor Merkel, for example, said she still hadn't decided whether it was a good idea to lift the embargo or not. She said just because 2 countries have changed their mind doesn't mean that 25 others have to follow. Kate.
Chris, thank you very much. It's coming up now to 1:15 and our main story this lunchtime. 250,000 extra primary school places are needed in England by next year. A new report finds 1 in 5 schools is already full and the need for more capacity urgent. And coming up,
I'm here in Western Iceland watching the Walking with the Wounded teams, training for what sounds like the impossible.
On Look North in 15 minutes. The Leeds designed smartphone app that's opening up a whole new world to people living with disabilities. And doing something funny for money, we take a look at what you've been up to for comic relief.
Veterans and VIPs are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the launch of HMS Belfast, once the largest and most powerful cruiser in the Royal Navy. It's seen more than 30 years of active service and has been moored on the River Thames since 1971, where it's proved to be a major tourist attraction. Our correspondent, Robert Hall, is on board. Robert, over to you.
Kate, Belfast escaped the scrapmen by the skin of her teeth back in the 1960s, and as a result, the people who'll be coming to this weekend's celebrations can see a time capsule of life in the Royal Navy from the Second World War to the Cold War. When you look at Belfast today, you see a ship looking pretty well as she did on the day that she retired. You can go from the Admiral's Bridge to the engine room, and everywhere you will find traces of the story of a long and active life.
She's the last of her breed and surely deserves a party. There are stories to be told and toasts to be raised as today's generation reflects on her adventures and celebrates 75 remarkable years.
Mrs. Chamberlain launches HMS Belfast and is Northern Ireland proud.
Launched on St Patrick's Day, HMS Belfast saw nearly 30 years of active service in every corner of the globe. Saved from the scrapmen at the last minute, she has one of the UK's most prestigious berths. Thousands of visitors have explored her decks to discover adventures which took her from the heat of the Far East to convoy duties amid the icy perils of Arctic waters.
The first trip we made up there was horrendous. High winds, seas, mountainous seas. We picked up just like a toy. The screws was turning out the water.
Fire! Belfast's surviving crew members are an extended family who shared tough times, laughter and the much lamented rum ration.
I remember walking out onto the boat deck about 3 in the morning and thinking, this is strange, the ship's starting to get a list. It was me going down, and the boat deck had been painted, and overnight it had dried, and they couldn't get me off the deck in the morning. So they had to get scrapers to get me off the deck. Stand by!
This weekend, visitors and VIPs will roam from the Admiral's Bridge to the gloomy depths of her engine rooms as the UK salutes another milestone in a long and active life.
When you do walk the decks here, you really can sense what it must have been like in those icy conditions off the Arctic. And what's most remarkable about the ship is the way that it's not fussy. Things are left pretty well as they were. This is the Admiral's Bridge, for example. It's one example. You go further down into the ship, there are the sights and the smells and the sounds of a working ship, all of which is intended to show this weekend's visitors and others far beyond that her story will long outlive those who served aboard her, Kate.
No, indeed. Robert, thank you very much indeed. And that lovely shot there of HMS Belfast. Thank you. And those rum rations. Now, Pope Francis told an audience of cardinals this morning that there's no place for pessimism in the Catholic Church. The Pope, who was elected on Wednesday, urged the leaders of the Church not to give in to what he called the bitterness that the devil places before us. From Rome, Alan Johnstone reports.
Until just a few days ago, some of these men will have dreamt of being elected Pope. But for now at least, their chance has gone. This man was chosen. He's ascended to the throne of St. Peter. The Vatican's a bit like a medieval monarchy. The Pope is all-powerful here. He lays down the law, but he must also try to inspire.
Non cediamo mai al pessimismo.
Let's never surrender to pessimism, he said, as he urged the cardinals to take the faith to the four corners of the world. Every word this new Pope utters, every thought he expresses, everything he does is being held up to the light, subjected to intense scrutiny. And all the time in these early days, a picture is emerging of an austere but very down-to-earth man. One cardinal was moved by the Pope's first act after he was elected.
His first gesture was to go down halfway down the Sistine Chapel to greet one of the cardinals who has problems walking. That was a touching thing to do. Here he is, being elected the head of the church, and his first thing is to reach out to a brother who's in difficulties. I think it was a phenomenal thing.
The new man in charge of the Vatican is getting off to a good start, but he must confront many challenges and controversies here and around the world, and there are certain to be much tougher times ahead. Alan Johnston, BBC News at the Vatican.
A man accused of killing 6 of his children in a house fire in Derby has denied the charge in a series of testy court exchanges. Mick Philpott was being cross-examined by the prosecution barrister about discrepancies in his statements about what happened on the night of the fire. Mr Philpott, his wife Mairead and their friend Paul Mosley all deny manslaughter. Well, our correspondent Jeremy Cook is at Nottingham Crown Court for us. What exactly did the court hear this morning then, Jeremy?
Well, this is Mick Philpott's third day on the witness stand, and as you've been saying, he's been continued to be cross-examined by the prosecution counsel Richard Latham QC. It's been repeatedly put to him that his version of events on the night in which 6 of his children died in this fire is false. Mr Latham accused Mick Philpott of deliberately starting the fire to a pre-arranged plan. He said the 56-year-old had started the blaze using petrol and had then gone outside to rescue his children, having left a ladder within easy reach and a wrench to break the bedroom window. Mr Latham said Mick Philpott made no effort to put the fire out, even though there was a fire extinguisher in the kitchen. He said, "Your plan was to go out, rescue the children and be a big hero and a victim at the same time, wasn't it?" Mick Philpott said, "No, I don't see myself as a hero." Yesterday, Mick Philpott suggested that traces of petrol on his clothes may be explained by the use of a garden strimmer. Today, the prosecution said that the brand of petrol used in the strimmer was not the same as the brand found on Mick Philpott's clothes. The case continues.
Jeremy, thank you. Attempting to walk to the South Pole would present an enormous challenge for even the most able-bodied person. It's a 200-mile walk in extremely hazardous conditions. But a group of servicemen and women, some with profound physical and mental injuries, have come together from around the world to train as part of Prince Harry's charity, Walking with the Wounded. They want to challenge perceptions of what can be achieved against the odds. Our correspondent Frank Gardner joined them.
It feels like the end of the earth. A mountain blizzard in western Iceland. Where better to train for one of the toughest challenges of their lives, a race across Antarctica.
1 minute you think you're going good, and then next minute a nice big blast comes in and blows you over. It's pretty intense.
3 teams of servicemen and women will be competing from the US, Britain and the Commonwealth. Everyone here has suffered life-changing injuries in combat. They've been shot, blown up, burned and traumatized. The charity behind this venture is Walking with the Wounded, patron Prince Harry. Unable to walk after my own gunshot injuries 9 years ago, I went to see them training.
This tearing wind and sub-zero temperatures here in Iceland are exactly the testing ground that these injured servicemen and women need before they take on the hazards of the Antarctic and the coming race to the South Pole.
Many of the wounded are amputees. This US soldier is totally blind. For him and many others, this is their first time ever on skis.
The problem's it's just the wind and the skiing, and also people have never skied before, and the amputee guys, I think they're just getting used to finding the feet on skis and different things are hard to come to terms with everything.
Any second thoughts?
None at all, Frank, none at all.
In these conditions, it helps them to remember why they're doing this.
Being able to raise awareness of wounded soldiers, and there's charities such as Walking with the Wounded Soldier on, and the like that provide avenues for the public to get behind their wounded soldiers.
Iceland is a tough environment, but the Antarctic will be tougher still. The 12 team members finally selected can expect conditions that make this feel like a walk in the park. Frank Gardner, BBC News, Iceland.
It's Gold Cup Day at Cheltenham, one of the biggest events in the racing calendar. Safety's a major talking point there after jockey JT McNamara seriously injured his neck in a fall yesterday. Well, he's now in an induced coma. Joe Wilson's our man at the festival. I understand he remains in intensive care, Joe.
Well, let me update you on that situation first, Kate. Yes, you may recall him being airlifted to hospital in Bristol from the course here yesterday after that fall. He's actually been in theatre today in Bristol, and it's been confirmed that he fractured 2 vertebrae in his neck during that fall. I think it may be days, even weeks, before the full consequences of his injuries of that fall are known. In the meantime, his recovery has been coordinated here by the Injured Jockeys Fund. For example, they've helped his wife get over to Bristol to be by his bedside. I've been speaking to the Injured Jockeys Fund today. What they've also confirmed is that within the weighing room, all friends, of course, other jockeys of JT McNamara, they are united, I think, in a sense of shock and concern for McNamara, but they're also united in a sense that on Gold Cup Day, the show must go on. The dangers of racing are part of that very strong fraternity, and I think in a way they're feeling that today even more intensely.
Yes, and just very briefly then, as you do look ahead to this afternoon's Gold Cup, the favourites?
Yeah, well, JT McNamara, remember, rode here as an amateur. We could have another amateur jockey winning the Gold Cup because Sam Whaley-Cohen again goes on board Long Run. You may recall them winning the Gold Cup here in 2011. To win, lose and then win back the Gold Cup is very rare. Only Porto Star's done it. Trained by Nicky Henderson. Of course, Long Run once again. Henderson also has a good chance with Bobsworth. But the big news, I suppose, in terms of the Gold Cup here is that AP McCoy, a former winner, of course, has switched horses. He will be riding Sir Deschamps at 3:20 this afternoon. The reason, Kate, there's a vacancy on that horse is because his normal jockey is injured. It is a tough game.
Joe, thank you. Today is the 25th Red Nose Day. People across the UK all doing something funny for money. Tonight's live 8-hour comic relief programme will be broadcast on BBC One and 2 and BBC Radio, of course, and will feature some of the top names in British comedy. Our entertainment correspondent, Lizo Mazimba, has more.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a night of comic relief.
How it all began, little knowing that a quarter of a century and well over £500 million later, Red Nose Day would have become one of the country's best known and most successful fundraising efforts. Its simple formula of combining well-known celebrities and humour has inspired the public to support a cause that says it has made a genuine difference for millions.
I get quite emotional that people like One Direction and Jessie J have grown up with it since their first year at school. And so they've actually been raising money for UK and Africa all their lives.
Tonight is the centre point of Comic Relief's efforts, but the campaigning started months ago. A team of 6 celebrities, including Spice Girl Mel C and Jack D, took on a special challenge earlier in the year, braving 100 kilometres of one of Africa's largest rivers, the Zambezi. And the highlights from tonight's programme include the return of one of the UK's best-loved comedy characters. Now, David Brent fancies himself as a media mogul. The show will also include examples of where Comic Relief say their money's badly needed, including pop band One Direction's visit to poverty-hit communities in Ghana. The group has also recorded this year's official single.
We're incredibly honoured. It's a great honour and it's such a great cause, so we hope people buy it several times.
Tonight's show will be one of the last live broadcasts to come from Television Centre before it ends decades as the BBC's home of broadcasting, adding even more emotion to tonight's historic anniversary show. Lizo Mazimba, BBC News, Television Centre.
Well, good luck to all involved tonight. It will also be the last BBC News at One Bulletin from our iconic television centre here in West London. It's been home not just to the BBC newsrooms, of course, but to TV classics from Strictly Come Dancing, Blue Peter, Morecambe and Wise. We'll return on Monday from our new studios. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Until then, we'll take a look now at what the weekend weather holds in store with Alina Jenkins. Alina.
Hello there, Kate. The weather is going to throw a lot of things at us this weekend. For this afternoon, it's wet and it's windy. We've got a band of rain working its way southeastwards. And you can see here on the earlier satellite picture where the rain has been. Behind it, a peppering of cloud indicating some sunny spells but also some fairly frequent wintry showers. But our band of rain draped across much of northeastern England, the Midlands and southwestern parts of the country, bringing some large totals for a time. But across Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, the skies will be brighter here through the afternoon, but you won't have to look too far to find some of those wintry showers, which could have some hail, some snow, some sleet, maybe even some thunder mixed in with it too. But our band of rain across the Midlands and parts of Wales, central and southwestern parts of England, fairly slow moving, and in places particularly over higher ground we could see as much as 40 millimetres of rain, a strengthening southwesterly wind as well, touching gale force along the coast. Now the band of rain perhaps not reaching southeastern England until this evening, and behind it we will eventually see some clearer skies, and that will bring a risk of ice in places, some pockets of frost and fog. And then during the early hours we see a risk of some snow affecting northern parts of England and Scotland, and temperatures here getting close to freezing, but where we keep the rain, as we will across many southern counties, and they hold up to between 5 and 7 Celsius. So for tomorrow, there is a risk of some snow across northern parts of England, Cumbria, for example, and also southern parts of Scotland, perhaps up to 5 or 6 centimetres for a time during Saturday morning. And then that risk extends its way further northwards. So during the course of Saturday afternoon, as we move into the Highlands and the Grampians of Scotland, there could be as much as 10 centimetres, and that's likely to cause some disruption. So do keep an eye on the forecast if you can. For the rest of England and Wales, where our band of rain slow to move from southeastern counties, but eventually it will, and behind it some sunny spells, but also again further frequent wintry showers, which could have some hail, sleet or snow mixed in with them. Now, as we go into Sunday, we keep our area of low pressure, but there will be some clearer skies overnight as we go from Saturday into Sunday, and that's likely perhaps to bring a risk of ice in places. Low pressure firmly in charge on Sunday, further fronts moving their way across, so Sunday itself remains an unsettled picture. There will be some spells of sunshine once again, though. There will be heavy and frequent wintry showers, so there is lots going on with the weather over the next few days. There are some warnings in place, and you can find those and further updates on our website. Kate.
Lena, thank you. And on BBC One, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Look North, Yorkshire's top stories this lunchtime. Campaigners opposed to high-speed rail attempt to derail the government's plans with their own legal challenges. And doing something funny for money. Plenty of laughter and just a few tears as Yorkshire gears up for comic relief. Good afternoon. Campaigners in Yorkshire will attempt to derail the proposed high-speed train link between Birmingham and Leeds with a series of legal challenges. A local law firm says it's already received approaches from people in our area affected by the plans. It follows today's High Court ruling that the government's consultations relating to the first phase between London and Birmingham were unlawful. But 9 other legal challenges were rejected this morning, and the government says it will now press on with its HS2 plans. The project's supported by MPs, councils and business organisations across Yorkshire. Olivia Richwald reports.
This family business has been built up over 55 years. Jo's parents passed it on to her, and now her son Ed is taking charge. But the new high-speed rail line is planned straight through their fishing lakes.
Yeah, we've met with our MP Alex Shelbrooke, with Leeds City councillors, we've written to the Transport Minister and to HS2. Unfortunately, we've had very little response. If you look at the result down south, people with a lot of resources behind them have not been able to get the line moved or stopped. They've only been able to challenge the consultation process, which ultimately won't stop HS2.
Today there's been a small victory in a long battle. Part of the multi-billion-pound scheme which deals with compensation has been declared unlawful in the High Court. And this law firm in Leeds says it's already been approached by clients interested in taking HS2 through the courts.
Well, it's all about action groups. I think if you are coordinated, you are motivated and informed, you have a much better chance of influencing where this proposed route will be. It's likely to take another 12 or 18 months or so before a final route is decided.
From her kitchen table in Church Fenton, Jo Mason is coordinating a rebellion. If the new train line gets built, she'll be able to see it, hear it and feel it.
We're up against the might of HS2. They're spending an absolute fortune on PR. We're having to raise our money where we can, little fundraising events. So it really is sort of David and Goliath. But we will take legal action wherever we can.
Despite today's High Court decision, the government says HS2 is still on track to begin construction in 4 years' time. It says the scheme will be good for business. And while Jo plans her next fundraiser, Ed continues to gather support for his campaign.
West Yorkshire Police are making fresh attempts 20 years on to try to solve a missing person case. Sean Thompson from Nottingley vanished without a trace in 1993 while walking to a local job centre. The anniversary of his disappearance brought his family together today to make new appeals for help. Our crime correspondent John Cundy reports.
Sean Thompson's niece, sister and mother united today seeking any explanation of whatever happened to the 25-year-old. For his sister, it was all too much.
Sean's now been missing for 20 years and they always say time's a healer.
But for us it hasn't been. We have no idea where Sean is. It's like he's literally fallen off the face of the earth. We live every day hoping he will walk back into our lives and we will know he is safe.
What Sean Thompson looked like 20 years ago and how he might appear now as a 45-year-old. Police believe someone must have seen Sean on March the 18th, 1993. A medical condition made him walk in a peculiar way on his tiptoes.
We were able to identify the last person to see him, which is why we knew he was en route to the Dole office. But since that time we've had nobody come forward, no further sightings, and we just do not know where Sean is.
We've had to carry on with our lives, but we always think about him and would urge him to get in touch. Sean, we love you and miss you.
The mystery of a loner who just vanished. Sean Thompson's family are still desperate for help 20 years on. John Cundy, BBC Look North.
A man's been charged with firearms offences after a suspected explosive device was found in a house in Leeds last night. The package was discovered during a police raid on Sholbroke Avenue in Chapeltown. It was then taken to Soldiers Field in Roundhay, where it was destroyed by bomb disposal experts. Dozens of people had to be evacuated from the two sites. South Yorkshire Fire Authority are to change their incident response time targets after failing to meet current goals. A flat rate target time for all of South Yorkshire could be introduced, or response times could be scrapped altogether, in which case the fire service would simply promise to arrive at an incident as soon as possible. Another option is a risk-based plan where crews would arrive faster to major incidents but take more time getting to those with a lower risk. Part of the M62 is closed this lunchtime after a lorry carrying 10 tonnes of salmon overturned on the eastbound carriageway. The accident happened near Goole in the early hours of this morning. The 47-year-old driver suffered head injuries which aren't thought to be life-threatening. Well, work is ongoing to clear the frozen fish from the carriageway. It's unlikely the road will reopen, though, before this evening. Now, if you own a smartphone or a tablet, chances are you'll have downloaded an app, maybe a game or a navigation tool. But what about an app that could do really useful practical things, like opening the curtains, locking the door and operating CCTV systems? Well, a company in Leeds has created an app that can do all of those things. It's designed to make life easier for people living with disabilities. Sally Young's been to meet one woman who says this new technology is making a big difference to her quality of life.
Hello?
Hi Nikki, it's Sally. Is it okay to come in?
Yeah, come straight through, Sally.
Thanks.
Nikki Barker lives in a specially converted extension on the side of her parents' bungalow. She has a degenerative muscle wasting disease. Her mobility is declining.
I could walk till I was about 7 or 8 years old, and then gradually, bit by bit, my other limbs were affected. And in my 20s, I lost the use of my arms and my hands, which was more difficult than not being able to walk.
Nikki can't swipe a smartphone or tablet, but she can use a push button on the side of her wheelchair to operate an app on her iPad, and that app gives her control over almost everything in her room.
Well, when I'm not in this room, I feel disabled. When I'm in this room, I've got some independence back and a bit of dignity, and I don't really get frustrated. It makes a massive difference.
And this is where the app was designed. RSL Steeper in Leeds specialises in assistive technology.
The idea behind the app really was to bring all the sort of environmental control technology experience that we'd had right up to date and bring it onto a high-tech sought after platform really. Everybody else has got an iPad. I think the potential's enormous. The devices that are coming out are more and more powerful, allows us to link up with more and more new up and coming technologies. I think the future's limitless really.
And it's not just about controlling the immediate environment. With this little